the group is largely consists of African journalists, more than European or American journalists, which is actually something that I like about it, because the journalists in Africa are kind of my heroes, because they're doing the same kind of work, but often without any kind of constitutional protections, which I enjoy. Oh, and then another investigation they did was lottery, investigating the lottery and how it tends to, in some places, lotteries are literally marketed towards poor people so that they can get poor people to pay for more government.
Why don't you tell us what you've been up to since you left? I shall leave the newspaper's name unmentioned.
Okay, well, let me roll it back a little bit and give a little bit more thorough of a self-introduction. And also, I'm going to start by I'll stop to take questions at a few points through my presentation too. So, my name is Joshua Vissers. I'm originally from the Grand Rapids, Michigan area, Jenison, if you're familiar with the area there. I went back to college in my late 20s, so I was a non-traditional student. Before I went back to college, I was trying to launch an audiovisual technician business. So I was working at concerts in some churches, like outdoor festivals, that kind of thing, running sound and camera and that kind of thing. And it paid well when I could find work, but often I couldn't find work, and so I also worked in gas stations and served tables third shift and a convenience store and did data entry. I spent a little time as a telemarketer. So I have a kind of a repair and remodel. I did some repair and remodel work with my dad, who does that. Well, he's retired now, but he used to do it professionally. So I have kind of a broad background before I went back to school. Eventually, I decided the AV Tech thing wasn't working out very well, and I went back to Grand Rapids Community College just to kind of explore my options. And I got pulled into journalism through the school newspaper. Within a semester, I applied and was given the job of editor-in-chief. And I was editor-in-chief for a year. We did some really good work that I'm proud of, including launching a weekly video newscast. It was kind of funny. The administration and staff and faculty of GRCC actually read the student paper more than the students did. But I still kind of figured that was a win, because it meant that we were having some impact. I transferred from GRCC to GVSU. There I worked with my professor, Jeff Kelly Lowenstein, who is the founder and director of the CCIJ. They're really kind of an organization that's still launching. When I say that I'm a member, their membership policy just launched a few weeks ago, and I've basically been told that I'm a member, but I don't actually have like a certification or a membership card or anything like that, because they're that new. They definitely started doing the work before they started organizing. But I did at the same time earlier this week attend a virtual conference with that organization, which was really interesting, because I got to do so with actually Jeff and I were the only Americans on the call. There were a couple Europeans and several African journalists, and so it's a really neat organization to be a part of. With their water investigations, I'm hoping that my location here among the Great Lakes is something that'll lend itself to that investigation down the road. So after I graduated from GVSU, I applied mainly to newspapers, because I wanted to work in print, and I applied mainly in Michigan because I wanted to stay in Michigan. And I got offered the job here at the Gazette, and I got offered a job in Lansing. And trying to decide between the two, what ultimately made my decision was what my life outside of work was going to be like. I told some of you before, I like getting outdoors. I like stories that get me outdoors more. And I just didn't see that happening much if I was going to be working in Lansing. And also, if I want to go for a hike and I live in Lansing or near downtown Lansing, it's a bit of a drive to find a real forest. Here I can literally walk down the street. So that was what really made my decision to move up here, and work for the Daily Mining Gazette. My fiance and I visited for a quick weekend before I accepted the job, and we really thought the area was beautiful, and that's why we came. For the first 6 months I was at the Gazette, I covered Baraga County. The main story I probably dove into was the covering of the wind turbines that were being planned for Lons Township that ended up not going through. That was a pretty big series of stories that got a lot of attention. Not just locally either. A lot of my work ended up being, copied and pasted and shared throughout the state and even different parts of the nation too. And you'll still see a lot of my work. I have sources from Baraga County because in that 6 months, I met a lot of people, and I still keep in contact with a lot of them. After 6 months, I was promoted to associate editor, which was good because it meant that my work was being appreciated and I got a little raise. But the bad part was that I was required to be in the office more, and I wasn't able to write as much. My beat became kind of less defined, so I wasn't in Baraga County as much, and I was in Hancock more, which I don't mind. I think Hancock is a nice city too. And that was also kind of where more of my ethical issues started coming up, because I was in the office and I was part of the decision-making process more. And then that eventually came to a head this year. I guess I'll kind of give the basics, although I hope that we don't spend too much time on this. But essentially, I imagine everyone here probably knows who Eric Keelanen is at this point. And he had been submitting letters to the editor, but he consistently named and encouraged, bullying, in my view at least, towards members of the health department, of the local health department. And that's against journalistic ethics. We wouldn't encourage bullying, like bullying or violence towards a public figure, let alone a non-public figure like a unelected bureaucrat, like all of the health department employees are. So we weren't running those letters, and then instead they went through the advertising department, and advertising took their money to run a full page ad that was very similar in content to the letters that we had been declining to run. So before it printed, I told them, hey, I can't work for a paper that's going to publish things like that. And long story short, they published it anyway, so I quit. And since then, I've launched Late Edition, which actually now is a great time to bring up my first graphic here. Yeah, so I've launched Late Edition. Maybe you've seen the logo around a little bit. I've I'm the only person working for Late Edition, but I have both paid and volunteer writers who also are submitting work to Late Edition already. It is, however, temporary. I'm working on a more permanent community-based outlet that will hopefully persist here, whether or not I stay long-term or retire or what have you too. So this is my first planned question break. I always kind of hated it when professors said, hold your questions to the end, because if I have a question in the first 5 minutes, it's just going to haunt me for the whole thing. So I figured I'd take a couple little question breaks here and there. This is the end of my self-introduction. So, if you have any questions about who I am or the work I've done, this would be a great time to ask them. The water investigation is really being run by the CCIJ, which their website, I believe, off the top of my head, is ccij.io. My contribution so far has been some of the stories from the Coles Creek issue that happened late last year, where it was almost a dozen houses whose water got cut off. So I contributed that work to them, but that's the only work that I've put into that investigation so far.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Anything else, or should I keep plugging along?
I have a.
Are there any I've already said that I need to say out completely?
CCI.
And then so before I get too much further in, I want to kind of set up a little bit of a analogy that I like to use for news a lot, which is basically to compare it to food. And the way that there's two ways it works really well, but the way that's more relevant right now is if you've heard of the concept of food deserts, which isn't necessarily that, oh, there's people out there starving. It's about how healthy the food is. Because, for instance, here in Houghton, we have a Walmart, and I live in South Range. But if I don't have a car, it's very difficult for me to get to Walmart. And then I'm stuck eating out of the gas station, essentially. And so, I might qualify as living within a food desert for that reason. Someone who lives even further away from a grocery store that has like a real produce section in it where you can buy food, they would be even deeper into a food desert. So and that's kind of where the term news desert also kind of originates, is that it's not about whether or not there is any news. It's about how available it is to people, and what the content of it is. Is it healthy news, or is it clickbait, or just rumor written up to look like news? So I like to use that kind of food metaphor, and which also ends up kind of combining with that desert biome metaphor too. So I hope the layered metaphors don't get out of hand. But like the food desert, the news desert is kind of the absence of professional quality news outlets. Late edition and I would say Michelle Bordeaux's Keweenaw Now are probably in about the same realm. They're fairly professionally produced, but they're not a formalized outlet. They're really, I call late edition a newsletter, but it's I hate this term, but it's a blog, really. and Keweenaw Now kind of is too. Until I managed to found that nonprofit and really formalize the organization, I don't think it really kind of counts against that news desert status. But let's take a little look at this news desert status. I have a couple slides that I want to show you. The first, I have zoomed in on the UP. This is part of a graphic from the Columbia Journalism Review, which is a pretty well-regarded industry news outlet. And basically the light colored ones on the far left and right here, Gogebic, and I don't know the name of this county off the top of my head, have no daily newspaper coverage. And then the Baraga has 2, and everything else in the middle has 1. This is a little dated though, because I was the last reporter assigned to cover Baraga County from the Daily Mining Gazette, the next county over. And I never ran into a counterpart from another newspaper. So I would argue that, the news desert situation here is actually worse than Columbia Journalism Review is recognizing, because Baraga County doesn't really have any daily news coverage. You probably say the same of Ontonagon and Keweenaw County too. The Daily Mining Gazette nominally covers those areas, but they don't have a reporter in those areas. They have some freelance coverage from Ontonagon County, as do I. But there's not a reporter covering day-to-day goings on in those areas. And so it's worse than this map actually makes it look. And unfortunately, even though this is a little dated, it's gotten even worse because of coronavirus. This is from the Tow Center for Journalism, and it's a little small, but you can see those dots are marking cuts in newsroom employment across the country. This actually, on the flip side, may paint a bit of a darker picture than reality, because if you look closely at the UP, which I don't know if I can actually zoom it in anymore for you or not. Let me see. That seems to be the limit of it. But there's 4 dots there, and those 4 dots are on the 4 daily papers that are owned by Ogden newspapers. If you didn't know that, the Daily Mining Gazette is owned by Ogden newspapers. So is the Daily Mining Journal and the 2 daily news south of here too. And I looked into this a little bit because that actually surprised me a little bit. And I guess the reason they put a dot on all of them is because Ogden newspapers only released information saying they had company-wide cuts. They didn't say who they cut where. So the person who put this graphic together was like, well, be on the safe side, I'll just put a dot on all of their newspapers. And they own 80 newspapers across the state, or across the country, I mean. So this might actually paint a slightly darker picture. But the reason for these cutbacks is, of course, because there's less money. And I have one more graphic here to show that. This is for newspapers in 2020. And you can see Gannett, who owns USA Today and a lot of other newspapers, especially lost a lot of revenue. But most of the other major news companies have lost some too. And this is a little, I got my slides a little out of order here, but the problem is too, it's been a long running trend. Here I've got data running from 2006 to 2013 from the Pew Research Center. And they show that, the revenue for news gathering fell by almost a third in less than 10 years, which is, a huge drop. But it's compounded by the fact that television news has actually had an increase in revenue, particularly cable news and Fox News especially, whereas newspapers are particularly suffering. Most of that is in lost advertisement revenue. Now, as far as businesses failing, I don't have a ton of sympathy for failing businesses, except the problem with, news succeeding while newspapers fail is that television news actually relies on newspaper news and other local content. Fox News and CNN and MSNBC, if you pay attention, you'll see that they reference local news sources and newspapers all the time. And actually, I've got a share screen here to do, and a little video clip from a cable news program, no less, that I wanna show you. I saw it years ago, but it stuck with me. I don't remember anything else from this program, but this little clip stuck with me. So let me do that real quick. It's just about 30 seconds long, I think.
Watch how often TV news ends up citing print sources.
According to the Chicago Tribune.
According to the Detroit Free Press.
According to the San Francisco Chronicle.
According to the Times-Picayune.
The Boston Globe.
The Orlando Sentinel.
The Philadelphia Inquirer.
The Pittsburgh Tribune Review.
The Detroit News. And the Houston Chronicle reports.
The Los Angeles Times reports. The Oklahoman reports. The Hartford Courant reports. The Salt Lake Tribune reports.
It's pretty obvious, without newspapers around to cite, TV.
So TV news wouldn't have much actual news, is kind of his point that he gets to there. So if you want to be reflected in those national news outlets, you really have to have a local news outlet too. The problem, of course, being that news deserts are growing across the country. This, you can't quite see this graphic shows that all the red counties have no newspaper based in them, and the yellow counties have only a single newspaper based in them. This is from usnewsdeserts.com, which is a project from the Knight Foundation for Journalism. And this has been growing and getting worse. So the money is drying up. The newspapers lay people off to try to compensate for that, but that just compounds the problem because, for instance, when I was promoted out of Baraga County, they didn't hire another reporter to cover Baraga County. So they have fewer stories from Baraga County. Then they start losing readers from Baraga County, which I don't know statistically. I only know anecdotally. I had people tell me from Baraga County, oh, since you left, I've canceled my subscription. I didn't have access to the statistics, so I can't say say that for sure. But once you start losing readers in an area, then it becomes harder to sell advertising. The night owl or the village gift store in Lance aren't going to want to buy advertising in a newspaper that no one in Lance reads. So if you don't have that coverage, you lose your readers, you lose that advertising revenue. And then if you just, as you lose more money, you just lay off more reporters and editors, which is what a lot of news and TV stations and radio stations do. That's what they do. It kind of reinforces that loss and creates a spiral that's really hard to recover from.
Lost the audio, lost the feed.
All right. Yeah, nothing changed on my end, so I couldn't tell. All right. What was the last thing I said? Where was I?
See, maybe right after you were talking about nobody in Lance would want to buy advertising. Or...
Oh, okay. All right. So yeah, if no one is buying and reading the newspaper in Lance, then no businesses there are going to want to buy the newspaper. So you lose that kind of quality of coverage and that revenue, through losing reporters. But as you lose reporters, the ones you have left become kind of inadequate too. When I founded Late Edition, I was really intentional about making sure I had a week before I was expected to publish anything. Because if I'm trying to write a good story, I have to do some initial research. I have to find contacts. I have to reach out to them and schedule interviews. I have to prepare and do the interviews. Then I have to, either write or maybe edit if I'm doing a podcast or a video of some kind. And then I have to get it up all on the website. And to do a good job at all of those things takes more than a day. It just does. You can rush through it and produce something in a day. But if you're really going to do a good job, it takes 2 or 3 days at the very least, if things go well. The problem being is that, the Daily Mining Gazette and the local television station and the local radio station, they have to produce something every day, sometimes more than once a day. So if you only have a couple reporters, those reporters are rushing through the process every day, all week. They probably don't enjoy it any more than you enjoy watching these shallow stories that don't dig to the real underlying matter of things. Because it's a lot of pressure to work under a daily deadline like that. So part of the reason I think, Late Edition is able to achieve a slightly higher level of quality is that, even though I'm just one person running around, I have a full week before anyone's like tapping their toe saying, hey, where's your story? I'm waiting to see that. The Daily Mining Gazette they only have 2 reporters right now. So that means, if they're going to put local news on the front page, both of those reporters have to turn in at least one good story every day. And they're not able to do that. And it'd be unreasonable to expect 2 people to be able to do that. If they had a dozen reporters, each one could turn in a couple stories a week and they could cover 2, 3, maybe even 4 pages with local news. But they're not making ad revenue anymore. So, and I guess before I get to how you can solve that problem, or how at least I'm trying to solve that problem, I'd like to highlight a couple other reasons that's bad, or really just one big one. Most of this ad revenue has been lost to social media. The social media giants, they've until this year at least been completely hands off as far as regulating the content, which allows politicians, government agencies, business owners, and just lobbyists, anybody, to basically get out there and talk to thousands, if not millions of people directly all at once. 30 years ago, if you wanted to get on TV or radio and talk to that large of a crowd, you had to go through a reporter or an editor, and you had to at least run the risk of being questioned about what your claims were. Now anybody can jump on Twitter, almost anybody, and just fire off a missive, and it goes straight to people, and there's no fact checking. It leaves reporters, like me or the people in Washington, to try to chase after those falsehoods, fix them after the fact, which is so much more difficult than being able to stand in the way and be like, okay, hold on, if you're going to make those claims, I'm going to have to ask you these very important questions. And then, furthermore, there's been a rejection of the media left, sometimes with good reason, because like I think I've highlighted, there are certainly ways that journalism is failing. But as the mainstream media is rejected, further embrace these alternative sources that don't have the same, ethical structure and editorial structure. I would say, one of late edition's problems is the fact that I'm the only person working here, and I don't have an editor. I've been acting as my own editor, and it's not actually even that comfortable for me. I would much prefer to be working with an editor. Okay, before I move any further, I actually think I blew through at least 2 question sections on my thing. Are there any questions about the problems in journalism before I get to some of the potential solutions?
Joshua,
The website, it's lateedition.live.
Okay.
I also, if you go there, you can, there's a menu, just 3 horizontal lines. And you can click to the Substack, which will let you subscribe to my weekly email. I send out a weekly email newsletter on Saturday nights. And that contains, whatever work I've done through the week. And then also, if there's good stories that I've seen other people create, I try to focus as locally as possible, either state or UP stories, but sometimes they sneak some national news in there too. So that's that. And then there's a Facebook page too, that I also share most of my work out to, and also some through the week when I'm working on other stuff, I'll share a lot of Associated Press work, actually, is what I typically share out there.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I just have a question or
kind of grazed off a part of that food news metaphor that I like to use too, which is that it used to be that you could be kind of just a passive consumer of the news. Just any of the journalism that was out there was usually of at least some quality. Now a lot of it is junk food. It's garbage, and you have to construct a news diet with more intention. You have to decide, and it's okay to have some of that junk food in there still. If you think of the food pyramid, you can still have some of the sugar at the top. That's okay, but you have to make sure that it's sitting on top of an established and varied diet beneath it of different sources. That's why I always think of the Associated Press as kind of the go-to. It's consistently as the least biased and the most factual by just over and over again. The Associated Press gets that rating. They're the least biased and the most factual. But I don't rely on them. I read Columbia Journalism Review to kind of get that industry take. I do listen to NPR. I'll scroll Google News just to see what's on there. I have a couple different like kind of news aggregator apps that pull together a selection of different news. So, I have my AP news, which I kind of think is my meat and potatoes, or maybe my vegetables even. And then, I watch some, I read The Onion, which is a satirical news site. I read that sometimes. They've been around for a long time. That's my sugar at the top of the pyramid. And then I try to pull in some other variety here and there just to make sure that I'm not, in the news bubble or that reflective bubble that I don't want to feel like I'm in some kind of cage of news. So I make sure I venture out a little bit here and there. But I think it's very important to construct that news diet, and it's different for some people too. If my food diet reflected my news diet, I would be 300 pounds, because frankly, I consume way more news than is probably healthy on a whole. For most people, 10, 20 minutes of news a day is probably enough, really, as long as you've got a balanced diet in that 20 minutes.
I want to just say that there are some alternative.
Invest in them a little bit more, and take the time to modernize. I think a good website could support the print edition of the Daily Mining Gazette, rather than detract from it. But the ownership of the Gazette doesn't agree. There have been some newspapers, particularly on the East and West Coast, that wealthy people have bought. Jeff Bezos is probably the easiest one to mark, but there are other examples too. So there are some people who have, purchased newspapers and reinvested in them to try to make that happen. But it's been kind of recent enough where it's hard to tell. And then like the Washington Post.
While Josh is out, I'll just say,
Yes, you are.
Must be a concern.
Briefly, with late edition, I'm giving my work away because that's just how I feel like it should be. But I do have a Patreon account, and Patreon is a website that essentially lets people subscribe to, give me a certain amount of money every month as a donation, essentially. And so I have like a $3 level, 14 and 50, which I only did because some people really, I would never ask people to pay me $50 a month for what I'm doing right now, but some people wanted that. So I made that for them. So that is how I'm supporting myself right now. And I work a little part-time job too. I'm going to move things on into this next, because I've brought it up, I think, almost half a dozen times now. I am chasing the idea of founding a nonprofit news source. And it's going to have a couple key differences from the currently existing news sources that I hope will set it apart enough that it will better serve the community and also hopefully lead to better careers for local journalists too. So the big benefit behind a nonprofit, and this is a term that I'm borrowing from someone that I've been reading a lot of their work as I'm preparing for this, is revenue promiscuity. Basically, old style, the currently existing newspaper and radio station, they depend on advertising for almost all of their revenue. And subscription fees come in somewhere between 10 and 25%. That's based on national statistics that I saw. So it's possible that the local outlets are slightly different than that. But so a nonprofit, on the other hand, can still advertise and can still have membership or subscription fees, but they can also accept tax-exempt donations. It's a lot easier to, you could sell syndicated. You could host special events like, carnivals where the proceeds go to support the newspaper. There's one outlet that I heard of that's actually launching their own lottery as a revenue stream for the newspaper. So the idea behind launching a nonprofit is that, you can do all of these extra things and you can do them in an exempt manner. And in that way, you can, build a foundation and a financial base that isn't constantly shrinking like the more standard newspapers have been doing for 30 plus years now. Well, about 30 is right by the statistics. So that's one of the major benefits of having a nonprofit. Now, the one I'm working on is also going to have another benefit over the local news sources, or at least the local paper, in that it will be locally owned. I'm looking at like a board controlled model where the board members would be local people, and possibly some kind of employee or member owned structure as far as the actual ownership. So the idea is that, other than what's paid out to the employees and the contractors and whatnot, all of the money generated just gets reinvested into the community in one way or another. Whereas right now I have no idea how much, but at least some of the revenue, or the idea is some of the revenue leaves and goes to West Virginia, where Ogden Newspapers is based. I've also heard that the Gazette loses money all the time and it's just used as a tax write-off. But so I didn't have access to the books, so I don't know which one of those is really true. And then also it will be controlled by people in the community who care about the community. The publisher of the Daily Mining Gazette isn't even in the building most of the time. He works out of but he's the one that essentially made the decision that I quit over to publish that full page article. Well, down in Escanaba, sure, why does he care whether people up here are running nasty ads and letters in the newspaper? It's not his community. You need somebody who lives and cares about this community making those decisions. And so that's why, and that's part of why too, I'm doing late edition now, but I want to found an organization that isn't going to be totally in my control. There's going to be community representation on the board. And ultimately, I'd really community members, as staff. I'm a transplant to the area, but I don't see there's any reason why a local outlet shouldn't be working with student interns and eventually, training them up into being full-time reporters and editors. This work is tough, but it's not so tough that you have to go to Grand Rapids or Yale or Harvard to get trained to do it. Mainly you just need a thick skin and you need to care enough to want to do this over getting paid $150,000 a year. So there's no reason that people who live and grow up here and care about this community can't grow up to do that, as long as we create that job for them to train and grow into. And then the last point that I want to make is, like I said before, I like print editions. I like having that physicality and everything, but I also think, in the modern age, we need to go digital first, which essentially is just the idea that you print to the website or, you print to, the computer or whatever, as soon as you can, and then go to, so, and part of the reason I think that's important is, part of it's just efficiency. But also I think it's a lot easier to take the elements from a multimedia presentation or a website and lay it out in a engaging manner on a newspaper than it is to take the elements from a newspaper and lay them out on a website in an engaging manner. Because if all you have on your website is text, it's going to be difficult to read amidst all the flashing advertisements all over every newspaper's website, which is another thing. If you look at late edition, I have a very simple website design. There are no advertisements on it. I can't promise that'll always be the case, but there are none on it now because I like a clean, simple design. I don't want it distracting from the story. So my thought on print, because I know that's important to a lot of people, is, like I said, it might have to go to weekly or monthly. But at GRCC, we also, every semester, we published a magazine, like a glossy magazine. And only did it contain like our best work. We worked for a couple of weeks on the stories that went into that, great graphical design and photographs and that kind of thing. But it also served as a kind of souvenir for the students of their time with the newspaper, whether they were journalism students or not. I still have a couple copies of mine. And they're floating around. I think they're up on the shelf there somewhere. But I feel like that's something that you could do within a community too. Things like Copper Dog and Bridgefest and Parade of Nations. You could create kind of journalism focused products that are also doubling as souvenirs of those stories. And I think that at the very least, there's a future in print for that kind of thing, if not a more frequent periodical or newsletter of some kind. So I've gotten through all my bullet points. I think we've pretty much burned the hour there, but I'm happy to hang around and answer questions.